Chapter 7:16. Mrs. Shen looked up and said softly, "I don't know where the pigeons came from." She seemed to be deep in thought. Pei Chi stood in front of the window and saw the pigeons. The sound they made sounded like they were crying blood. She stood straight and looked a little thin. The nurse came in and reminded her softly, "Mrs. Tang, put on more clothes." "I told you, I'm not." Pei Chi's voice was a little low. "I've signed the papers with Tang Yu." He was not there on the day of the signing. She quickly signed the papers and gave them to the lawyer he sent. There was no need to see him again. She turned around and looked at the nurse. "I just had a miscarriage. I don't need to stay here for so long, right? I want to be discharged." The nurse was a little embarrassed. "You need Dr. May's permission before you can leave." Pei Chi put her finger on her abdomen, where there was a scar. Dr. May said that the baby didn't fall out and was cut out. She asked Tang Yu about the baby. The baby didn't come out safely. Couldn't they make a longevity tablet for him? She could find her mother if she wanted to. She remembered that he said that the baby shouldn't exist. Yes, it shouldn't exist, just like she shouldn't exist in his world. "I want to go for a walk." Pei Chi's voice was very soft. The nurse hesitated and said softly, "Then I'll go with you." Pei Chi smiled silently. She didn't expect that she was still so precious. Should she thank her brother? She hadn't walked for more than a month. Her body was so weak that it didn't feel like her own. She was sweating all over after walking for a while. The autumn sun shone on the lawn of the hospital. It was very bright and beautiful. Occasionally, there were some pigeons on the lawn looking for bugs to eat. When Pei Chi walked over, they flew away. She stopped and looked at Shen Zhongshan and Mrs. Shen in front of her. Shen Zhongshan was still the same as before. He was still eating and asking for more. Pei Chi looked at him and suddenly felt that he was actually very happy like this. She pursed her lips and looked at it silently for a long time. A greedy white pigeon probably took a fancy to the food in Shen Zhongshan's hand. It flew down and landed on Shen Zhongshan's shoulder, flapping its wings. He slowly raised his eyes and looked at Pei Chi. Then, he said 3 words very slowly, "Sis. Sis. Sis." Pei Chi looked at him and squatted down. She reached out to wipe the crumbs from the corner of Shen Zhongshan's mouth and smiled gently. Little Missy might have to leave. She had to leave this place, leave this city, because she couldn't breathe here. Mrs. Shen looked at her, then looked up at the sky. The white pigeons were flying freely in the blue sky. She suddenly said softly, "Miss Pei, take care." Pei Chi's fingers paused for a moment. She grunted and slowly stood up. A few white pigeons were flapping their wings excitedly. The sunlight was too bright. She must have squatted for a while, but her vision was a little dark. She steadied herself for a while before she could stand up straight. When she got back, she was sweating profusely and fell asleep. She slept in the white ward. In her dreams, countless pigeons were flapping their wings around her. Little angels were singing a song of praise. The sound came from afar, and then from near to far. It was faintly discernible. Her body was ice-cold, but her forehead was constantly dripping with cold sweat. Tang Xin. Chapter 7:17. She breathed heavily and stared at the white wall in front of her. Tang Xin. Pei Chi took the phone beside her pillow and dialed Tang Xin's number. The phone rang one after another, but no one picked up. She lifted the blanket and got off the bed. Just as she got off the bed, she heard a message. Pei Chi immediately picked it up. It was a message from Tang Xin. "Chi, where have you been? Dad sent me to America. It's so boring. He doesn't allow me to call him, so I can only send him messages secretly. Pei Chi looked at the few lines of words on it again and again before replying. I just came back to be city. Tang Xan chatted with her for a while, clinging to her in all kinds of ways. Pei Chi's eyes were moist. She didn't know how to tell Tang Xan that her child was gone, and she might not be able to save Tang Xan. She even thought that since she and Tang Yu were no longer together, she could find someone else to have another child. Her mind was filled with madness. After a long time, she calmed down and lay flat on the bed with the phone in her hand. She closed her eyes. She could still vaguely hear the voice of the little angel in her dreams, but it was getting further and further away. She didn't see Tang Yu again. He didn't come, so she didn't disturb him. Let's just leave it at that. After I sign it, I'll break it off cleanly. A week later, Tang Ziyuan came. He walked into the ward. Pei Chi had just drawn her blood once, and she saw him when she looked up. The atmosphere was a little uneasy and subtle. This man who used to be her father-in-law was actually her father. All this while, Tang Ziyuan didn't like her, and she didn't like Tang Ziyuan either. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to like him. Tang Ziyuan's mood was also very complicated. What the fuck? How could he be Pei Chi's father? 21 years ago, he didn't even know Zhao Ku at all. At that time, he and Yun were very close. Every night when he came home, Zhao Ku didn't even touch a hair. How could there be Pei Chi? However, Tang Ziyuan could roughly guess Chi's background and Tang Xian's. If it was in the future, he would definitely be very angry. Being cuckolded by Zhao Ku and being a father time and time again. Any man would not be able to endure it. But now, he was calm. Everything was because he wasn't resolute enough. As for Pei Chi, he would treat it as him doing something for Tang Yu. Tang Ziyuan watched the nurse leave, then said softly, if the results come out in the afternoon, you can be discharged. I bought a quiet villa for you to live in. It's pretty good. Probably because he was really uncomfortable, Tang Ziyuan added, it's pretty good. Pei Chi looked at him, at this familiar yet strange man. She called him daddy because he was Tang Yu's father. She really couldn't connect herself with Tang Ziyuan. She couldn't imagine that this man had only given birth to her after having sex with Zhao Ku. The atmosphere was tense. Tang Ziyuan felt that this was really a difficult task. He touched his nose and said, you rest well. I'm going out for a smoke. After going out, he was much more at ease. Wasn't his son a little too picky? Brother and sister. How could he think of that, and his old face was flustered. Tang Yu had forcefully put the skewer on his head. Thinking about Tang Ziyuan's son and daughter fooling around behind closed doors. If this got out, he wouldn't be able to see anyone. But there was no other way. Chapter 7:18. Perhaps it was because he no longer had anyone by his side, so he thought it would be nice to dote on Pei Chi like a daughter. At least he wouldn't be so lonely. Tang Ziyuan got into character, but Pei Chi didn't. She couldn't accept it even if it was just a medical report. In the afternoon, Dr. May read the report and said that she could be discharged. At that moment, her heart was relieved, but also a little heavy. The car slowly left Xinyuan Hospital. Tang Ziyuan and Pei Chi sat side by side in the back seat. Perhaps to ease the atmosphere, he patted her hand on her knee and comforted her. Daddy will take care of you from now on. Pei Chi froze for a moment, then turned her head to look at him. After a long time, she said, can I stay with Tang Xian? At that moment, Tang Ziyuan's face stiffened, and his muscles trembled unnaturally. There was even a hint of sorrow in his eyes. Pei Chi looked at him, her eyes carefully analyzing. Tang Ziyuan coughed lightly. We'll talk about it when Tang Xian's condition stabilizes. Pei Chi took out her phone and dialed Tang Xan's number, but there was still no answer. But soon, she received a message. It was from Tang Xan. The more Pei Chi looked at the familiar words, the more panicked she became. His gaze quietly fell on Tang Ziyuan's face, causing him to feel flustered in his heart. "Stop the car!" Pei Chi suddenly shouted. The driver instinctively stopped the car, and Tang Ziyuan scolded, "Go back to Run's manor." But just as the driver was about to start the car, Pei Chi opened the door and got out. She ran desperately on the road. The cars on the road made warning beeps, but she didn't seem to hear it. She reached out and hailed a taxi. To the headquarters of Xingyuan. The taxi driver was in his 30s. Seeing that Tang Xan was a beauty, he couldn't help but say, "Xingyuan is a big company, and it seems like they're doing something big recently. I heard that they're going to have a marriage with Jin Taihe. In the future, the North won't be the only one." Pei Chi listened blankly. Marriage? There was a buzzing in her ears, and then she heard nothing. The world was like a traffic jam. It was motionless. There was not a single sound. Just like that, it was quiet. The driver in front was still talking. His lips kept moving, but she couldn't hear him. Very soon, the car arrived at Xingyuan building. Pei Chi opened the car door and alighted. The chauffeur said anxiously, "Miss, you haven't paid yet." However, Pei Chi couldn't hear it, nor did she turn around. "She's so pretty, so she's abnormal," the driver said angrily, then shook his head, admitting his bad luck. Pei Chi's appearance in Xingyuan Academy had shocked everyone in Xingyuan Academy. Even the receptionist was at a loss. This was the wife of the former president of Xingyuan. Even though they didn't know why, she had divorced the president, the loving scene they shared in the past was still engraved in everyone's heart. The receptionist forced a smile. "Miss Pei, I'm sorry. You have to make an appointment to see the president." Pei Chi pushed her hand away. Her slim figure swayed into the elevator like a ghost. The elevator went straight to the top floor. Through the mirror on the wall of the elevator, she saw her pale eyes and empty gaze. The elevator door opened, and Xiao Ran stood in front of her. When Xiao Ran saw Pei Chi, he was shocked as well. It had been a long time since they last met, and yet she had become so skinny. It was as though she had lost her beauty. Chapter 719. Xiao Ran couldn't stop her. He thought to himself, "This has to happen eventually, so I might as well let her in." Pei Chi entered Tang Yu's office. He was sitting behind his desk. Of course, there were a few other executives. After Pei Chi rushed in, the executives couldn't take it anymore and left. As they walked past Pei Chi, they sighed in their hearts. In the CEO's heart, a beauty was no match for the empire. They didn't believe the rumors that were spreading. If the CEO couldn't even figure out whether a woman was his sister or not, and was still married, then he wouldn't be the CEO of Xingyuan. After everyone left, Pei Chi's gaze landed on a small phone beside Tang Yu's hand. That was Tang Xan's phone. At that moment, Pei Chi felt as if something was stuck in her throat. It was so uncomfortable that she couldn't breathe. She stared at it and slowly, step by step, she walked closer. She stopped in front of him and looked at him. Then, she picked up the phone. Her fingers were trembling. She didn't want to believe it. She didn't want to believe that it was possible. She would rather believe that it was a prank. The phone was warm, which meant that he had taken it not long ago. She opened it and saw the message. It was from Tang Xan. Tears slid down her cheeks. Silently, the tears fell. "Where's Tang Xan?" she asked. Her voice was hoarse and her eyes were burning as she stared at him. Tang Yu sat on his chair. He didn't move, in fact, he couldn't move either. He used to think that there was nothing in this world that he couldn't solve. Nothing could trouble him. But now, he was actually powerless to do anything. Chi-Chi, he said. It was difficult for him to move. He knew that she would find out, but he didn't think that it would be so soon. Pei Chi-Chi's fingers tightened on the phone. Her tears kept falling and her voice was stern. Where's Tang Xin? He finally got up from his seat and slowly walked to her side. His large palm hesitated for a moment before he placed it on her shoulder. Pei Chi-Chi tilted her head and looked at his palm. Chi-Chi. His voice was low. Tang Xin is gone. Not here anymore. Pei Chi-Chi took a step back and looked up at him in shock. Although this was what she had guessed, when he said it out loud, her whole world collapsed. Tang Xin was gone, so, what was left of her? What else did she have? An omnipotent brother like Tang Yu? Or a father who could take care of her, Tang Ziyuan? She stepped back and looked at him stubbornly. Her voice was urgent. I don't believe it. I don't believe a single word of it. Tang Yu, you lied to me, you lied to me. She couldn't help backing up. Her frail body trembled like a reed that could be snapped in the wind. His heart ached as he held her tightly in his arms. His face was close to hers. Her cheeks were covered with cold tears. It was the deepest pain in her heart. She used all her strength to break free, but Tang Yu held her tightly in his arms. She buried her face in his chest. He held her head and said in a low voice, Chi-Chi. He didn't know what to say to comfort her. He didn't have a choice. She even hated him. In his arms, she screamed in pain. She called out Tang Xion's name with all her might. She struggled with all her might. He didn't let go of her. She bit him so hard that his shoulder was slowly stained with blood. Chapter 720. At that moment, the pain in her shoulder was nothing compared to the pain in her heart. She cried and fell into his arms. The world was spinning. When Pei Chi-Chi woke up, she heard Tang Yu talking to someone. His voice was low and deep. She's fine. Come and pick her up later. Then, there was silence. She opened her eyes and realized that she was sleeping in his room. Tang Yu was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with his back facing her. He was standing straight with his phone in his hand. His hand was hanging down, but his body did not move. She was still a little dizzy, but she forced herself to sit up and lifted the blanket. Her movement startled Tang Yu. He turned around, and there was a hint of pain in his eyes. Pei Chi-Chi raised her head and looked into his eyes. Time seemed to have stopped. She looked at him, and he looked back at her. Everything seemed to have stopped. After a long time, he walked over and took out a phone from his pocket. It was Tang Xion's phone. Tang Xion left something for you. It's all in this phone. His voice was faint and a little hoarse. Dad will come and pick you up later. He looked at her with deep love. If time stopped, he would be willing to pay any price for it. He looked at her one last time, turned around and forced himself to leave. Tang Ziyuan's car was already parked downstairs. Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi stopped him. His body froze. He stood by the door and clenched his fists. She lifted the blanket and got out of bed. She walked over and looked up at him. There was a faint smile on her haggard face. It was a faint smile. Tang Yu, should I congratulate you? He suddenly turned around, and his eyes were stained with a touch of blood. Chi-Chi, do you know that those few words of yours are enough to pierce my heart? His pupils contracted, and he stared at her eyes. He was sure that she knew something. Pei Chi-Chi took a step back, reached out, and gently pulled out something from her neck. It was the jade he gave her. She forcefully pulled the necklace off her neck. The thin necklace cut into her delicate skin, causing beads of blood to seep out. However, she acted as if she didn't feel it and continued to smile faintly. "Big brother, congratulations." After that, she threw the thing in her hand to the ground. Broken, 4 or 5 into several pieces. Tang Yu was in a daze for a moment. His gaze fell on those fragments for a long time. Pei Chi stood there stubbornly and didn't ask for his explanation. It didn't matter anymore. The child was gone. Tang Xian was gone. He was going to get married. Tang Ziyuan pushed the door open and saw this scene. He secretly sighed in his heart. What a sin. He believed that Tang Yu's heart was torn apart like the things on the ground. The three of them were speechless for a long time. After a long time, Tang Ziyuan finally spoke. He went forward and put his arm around Pei Chi-Chi's shoulders. "Chi-Chi, go back with Dad." As he said that, he felt a lump in his throat. Tang Xian was gone. He was willing to give all his fatherly love to Pei Chi-Chi. It could also be considered as taking care of her on behalf of Tang Yu. Pei Chi-Chi was still staring at Tang Yu. Her body was stiff, and she refused to move. Tang Ziyuan sighed in his heart. At this moment, Xiao Ran was trembling at the door. "President, the meeting is about to start. I'll be there in a moment." Tang Yu's gaze was fixed on Pei Chi-Chi's face. Chapter 721. Finally, Pei Chi-Chi made her move. She gripped her cell phone tightly and followed Tang Ziyuan mechanically. Step by step, she walked past Tang Yu. Her long hair was tangled in his shirt. For just a second, it was enough to make him yearn for it. In the end, they walked past each other. When the door closed, it was as if the door in Tang Yu's heart was closed. He stood there, looking at the bed that she had slept on and at the empty space. He had a feeling that he was the only one left in the world. Slowly, he squatted down and picked up the broken piece of jade. Although it was in pieces, he still carefully picked it up bit by bit. After half an hour, Xiao Ran did not see Tang Yu. When she came back, she saw Tang Yu squatting down and trying hard to pick up the pieces that were the size of rice grains. She froze for a moment. She wanted to say something, but in the end, she did not. Instead, she squatted down with him. She could feel this man's pain. At this moment, he was not the omnipotent CEO of Xingyuan. He was just a man who had lost his love. Xiao Ran suddenly looked up and said, "CEO, I believe in you." Tang Yu's fingers paused. Then, he did not say anything and continued to pick up the pieces. It was as if he had picked up Pei Chi-Chi's broken heart and pieced it back together. But where was his heart? Tang Yu did not know either. Xiao Ran squatted down with him and said carefully, "CEO Shen called. She said that she wants to confirm the venue and the gown for the engagement ceremony." After saying that, she looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu said expressionlessly, "Confirm with her. Let her decide on the gown." At first, Xiao Ran was a little out of sorts. He had always thought that this was Shen Lian's idea. He did not expect to hear it from the CEO himself. She was stunned and could not react for a moment. Tang Yu stood up and slowly patted the wrinkles on his shirt. He said slowly, "Cancel the afternoon meeting." Xiao Ran stood up as well. "All right." She looked at the thing in Tang Yu's hand and was stunned. Since he loved her so deeply, why did he have to let go? In the black limousine, Pei Chi-Chi was looking at Tang Xian's phone in tears. There were a lot of selfies and videos. In every picture, Tang Xian was smiling. In every video, Tang Xian would softly call her Chi-Chi and say happy things. Pei Chi-Chi's tears did not stop. Tang Ziyuan, who was beside her, had already calmed down a little. At this time, he could not help but feel sad again and shed tears. He silently handed the tissue to Pei Chi. "Wipe your tears, or your eyes will hurt." But she didn't respond to him. She just tilted her head and looked out the window. Holding the phone in her hand, she was in a daze with tears in her eyes. Tang Ziyuan felt even more uncomfortable in his heart. He sighed softly and said, "She and her mother are together. At least they have a companion." Pei Chi's body shrank and she curled into a ball like an injured animal. She hugged herself and cried silently. Tang Ziyuan couldn't stand it anymore and gently hugged his little daughter. What made him feel flattered was that Pei Chi would actually lean on his lap. Although she was just crying, it more or less comforted his middle-aged lost mood. From now on, he would be her father. His voice was unbelievably gentle. "Chi, don't cry. Daddy will take good care of you." He clumsily patted her back. Under his palm was her skinny little body. She ran back to call Tang Ziyuan. When the night was about to fall, Pei Chi appeared at the entrance of the cemetery. The sky was dark, and a new grave was placed beside Zhao Ke's. Tang Xian's picture with a sweet smile was embedded on the tombstone. If it wasn't for the picture, Pei Chi wouldn't have believed that it was Tang Xian in the picture. She stood there, and her whole body was cold. Here, the people closest to her were buried. Her mother, her sister. Pei Chi used her own phone to call Tang Xian's number, and the pink phone rang, one after another. It was Tang Xian's voice recording. "Chi, wake up, Chi." Chapter 723. Pei Chi stood there and said softly, "Tang Xian, wake up, okay? Answer the phone, we can still play the game we used to play, your favorite game. Tang Xian, I made chicken noodles for you. You said it was delicious, but you said it was a pity that you couldn't eat it every day. Get up, I can make it for you every day. Tang Xian, be good, get up, okay?" But, other than the voice on the phone, no one responded to her. Her fingers gently stroked her lower abdomen. Looking at Zhao Ke's photo, she smiled bitterly. "Is it because I was too cruel to you that the most important people around me were taken away one by one?" Her child was gone, Tang Xian was gone, the marriage that Zhao Ke was against was gone too. Was he wrong from the very beginning? If she had insisted on not marrying Tang Yu, Tang Xian could have lived longer, and this child that shouldn't have existed would not have been lost so painfully. She did not even get to see her child. Even if it was gone, even if it was dead, she still wanted to see it. The dark clouds in the sky suddenly changed. The September sky was filled with thunder. Above, the rain fell like beans. It was like a hot knife through butter, hitting her body. It was painful. Her delicate body swayed a few times, but she didn't move away. Instead, she still stood straight. The sky was getting darker and darker, and the graveyard was getting more and more eerie. The rain drenched her hair and rolled down her hair to her face. She could not tell which was the water and which was her tears. She just stood there, crying silently. It was even more desolate. Suddenly, a slender figure appeared behind her. Tang Yu silently stood behind her. After a long time, he let out a soft sigh and pulled her into his embrace. "Chi, let's go home." He buried his face beside her neck. She felt cold all over. Her body froze, but her eyes were still looking forward. She laughed softly, "Home. Tang Yu, do I still have a home?" She had no home for a long time, after her child was gone. Tang Yu closed his eyes and tightened his grip. Without another word, he picked her up and carried her to his car. He opened the car door and wanted to help her into the car, but Pei Chi broke free and ran a few steps before she was caught again. She forcefully threw herself into his embrace, causing her to feel a sharp pain. Pei Chi, listen to me. His voice was a little harsh because she had just had her surgery, and she would fall sick if she stayed in the rain. The rain fell on her face and on her clothes, but she did not care. She just raised her head and looked at him. The light was very dim, but her eyes were burning with anger, so bright that it was dazzling. He actually didn't dare to look at her. Obedient? Why do I have to listen to you? Mr. Tang, I've already obediently divorced you. What else do you want me to do? Obediently go back and be your baby sister, obediently be a bridesmaid at your wedding with Shunlian? She smiled coldly and took a step back. Really? You want me to do this, right? He looked at her and did not speak. His dark eyes were stained with a deep layer of pain. The rain continued to fall. In such a night, it seemed that human nature was even colder. Pei Chi said word by word, Tang Yu, don't even think about it. I will never be your sister. She turned around and wanted to leave. Every step she took made her heart hurt more than her body. Chapter 724. Chi. His voice was hoarse as he pulled her back into his arms. As she fell into his arms, her lips met his. He impatiently and roughly kissed her little mouth. Ignoring her resistance, he locked her hands behind her back and held her little head with one hand. His body was ice cold, but his lips and tongue were boiling hot. Just like that, he tore her little mouth into pieces. Their passionate entanglement brought with it desperation, again and again. She trembled and struggled, but she couldn't escape from him no matter what. Finally, he retreated from her lips, but he still kissed her and comforted her. His big hand let go of her little hand and hugged her waist instead. A slap landed on his handsome face, and the sound was especially clear in this rainy night. Mr. Tang, doesn't it feel good to kiss your own sister? Is it taboo? She looked at him, her body trembling, but her face was cold and filled with hatred. Tang Yu's eyes narrowed deeply. From now on, we have nothing to do with each other. Mr. Tang, don't forget that we've signed the papers. She slowly moved backward, smiling as tears welled up in her eyes. I owe you, so I'll use that child to pay you back. She ran forward with all her might, not caring if she would fall or what would happen if she ran out like this. What was there to care about? She had nothing left. He hugged her from behind and held her tightly in his arms. His breath was on the side of her neck. Pei Chi felt a warm patch on her neck. It was a warmth different from the cold rain. Pei Chi was a little dazed. Tang Yu hugged her tightly and breathed in her scent. Chi, you don't have to run. I'll get the driver to send you back. He hugged her and said in a low voice. Even though he was worried, even though he felt that she should take a hot bath right now, she hated him so much that he had to let go. He carried her to the black limousine, opened the door and gently placed her in the car. She sat in the back seat and he stood outside in the rain. The curtain of rain in the dark night left a deep shadow on the side of his face. His body was drenched, but there seemed to be a small cluster of flames burning in his deep and serene eyes. Pei Chi sat in the car, hugging herself and trembling under his gaze. Finally, Tang Yu closed the car door. Between them, there was a curtain of rain, a layer of darkness, and a layer of window. Under Tang Yu's instructions, the driver slowly reversed the car and left. Under the illumination of the headlights, the windshield wipers kept swaying from side to side. The golden goddess logo on the front of the car was shining in the rain, as if it was crying. He saw her face, a face that was no longer vivid in the darkness of the carriage. Tang Yu just stood there, watching the RV slowly drive out of the cemetery. The driver was still old Zhao. He was panicking and didn't know what to say. He looked at the movement behind them in the rearview mirror, then coughed lightly. I wonder how Mr. Tang is going to get back. I remember, Mr. Tang doesn't seem to have any cash on him. How far will it be to walk back to the rose garden? But there was no movement behind them. Pei Chi was still sitting in the back seat and didn't make a sound. Old Xiao sighed in his heart. It seemed that this relationship couldn't be undone. Chapter 725. Old Xiao drove quickly because Pei Chi's body was wet. He had to send her back as soon as possible. Tang Ziyuan was already waiting there. He would stay there to take care of her tonight. Although it was inconvenient for a man to do so, it was better than the little girls. Pei Chi sat in the back of the car. She was still in a trance. At this moment, the car shook violently, and then there was an ear-piercing sound. It came to a screeching stop. Old Xiao had rear-ended her. I'll go down and take a look. I'll be fine in a while. Old Xiao blamed himself. How could he be so careless at this critical moment? He got out of the car and saw that it was an ordinary family car in front of him. He was slightly relieved. After negotiating with the owner, Old Xiao directly transferred 10,000 yuan to the other party. In fact, it was only about 2,000 yuan to repair it. He kept his phone and said as he opened the car door, "It's settled. I've never had such a mess in all my years of driving." He fastened his seatbelt. Before driving, he glanced at the rearview mirror, but that glance was enough to make his heart jump. Young Madam was missing. Old Xiao's fingers trembled as he unfastened his seatbelt and got out of the car to look for her. It was still raining heavily. Old Xiao was drenched, but he couldn't find her. Old Xiao was dumbfounded. It would be strange if Mr. Tang didn't chop him up. His fingers trembled as he dialed Tang Yu's number. He hung up immediately after saying a few words. He wanted to drive to look for her, but the long line of cars stretched as far as the eye could see. It was not as fast as his legs. Pei Chi got out of the car and walked like a ghost. She didn't know what she had done. The cars that passed by were all honking their horns crazily. Some even rolled down their windows and scolded her for being a lunatic. Yes, she was crazy. If she wasn't crazy, how could she fall in love with her brother? The rain fell on her face. It was cold, and her whole body seemed to be frozen. Every step was difficult. She didn't know how long she had been walking. Her body was very tired, but her heart was not at peace. She didn't know how she fell. Just like that, before a car hit the brakes, she fell softly. My dears are guessing that Qin Anlin has a chance to enter the arena. The door of the black sports car opened and Qin Anlin got out. There was a model in his car, but it was hard to tell where they were going. Even in late autumn, that little model was still wearing a backless black gown. She had thoughtfully brought an umbrella over to shield Qin Anlin. As long as she slept with President Qin tonight, she would be the leading actress of King Entertainment tomorrow. It had to be said that young people were still too naive. Qin Anlin squatted down to look at the woman in front of the car. He was not in the mood to do anything tonight, so he had the leisure to meddle in other people's business. However, the young model beside her did not react this way. Her whole body was screaming crazily, come on, President Qin, come and get me. President Qin, this woman ran over on her own. Don't care about her. The young model squatted down and pressed her body against Qin Anlin's, trying to ignite him. Qin Anlin turned his head and glanced at her. His voice was cold and indifferent. If you don't want to care, you can leave first. The young model did not make a sound. In her heart, she was secretly thinking that this woman must be trying to blackmail him. Perhaps she was a leftover from President Qin's past. However, she did not dare to say this. Qin Anlin flipped over the woman's body on the ground and was stunned. Chapter 726. His eyes froze, and even his fingers were trembling. The young model was also slightly startled. This blackmailer was a bit too pretty. There was no way she would admit that this woman was prettier than her. She said with a bit of jealousy, "Isn't Chairman Qin afraid that people will latch onto you?" Qin Anlin only froze for a few seconds, and then he picked up Pei Chi. Her body was as cold as ice, and her wet hair stuck to her forehead. He pushed it away, and her eyes were closed. Her face was extremely pale. For some reason, Qin Anlin held her in his arms and opened his jacket to warm her up a little. The young model was anxious. "President Qin. Get out." Qin Anlin carefully put Pei Chi in the back seat of the car, closed the door, and ignored the young model. The young model was stunned. No matter how beautiful the woman was, she was as pale as a ghost now. What could President Qin do with her? She was unwilling to give up and wanted to pester him again. Qin Anlin had opened the door in front and said coldly, "Get out of here now if you don't want to be fired." He got in the car and started it. The young model was so anxious that she ran after him for a long time with the umbrella. "President Qin, my bag is still in the car." But Qin Anlin didn't hear it. His heart was full of Pei Chi now. His fingers holding the steering wheel were even trembling with excitement, and he was vaguely ecstatic in his heart. The car drove fast until it reached his penthouse apartment in B City. The exquisite apartment was more than 200 square meters, like a model room, with a simple European style. There was only one bedroom suite in such a large space, and the rest were all living rooms. There was a set of beige sofas, and behind it was a whole bookcase. There was a piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. Sitting there, you could see the night view of the entire B City. Qin Anlin kicked the bedroom door, carried Pei Chi in, and gently put her on the soft bed. At this moment, Qin Anlin was the most excited in his life, and he was trembling with excitement. Even the night when he got Shen Lian many years ago, he was not as excited as he was now. He tore off his tie and threw it on the floor. Then, he climbed into bed. He propped himself up with one hand and used the other to undo her buttons. Qin Anlin had seen countless people. Taking off a woman's clothes was a walk in the park for him, but now his fingers were trembling for a long time and he couldn't untie it. He sat on her body and tried to untie it with his hands. If he could not untie it, he tore the fragile, soaked cotton cloth. Then, Qin Anlin closed his eyes. He was clearly a patient, and he didn't have any other thoughts. But looking at him like this, he actually felt his body heat up unbearably. Pei Chi opened her eyes and saw that her clothes were in tatters. She was in an unfamiliar environment, and Qin Anlin was sitting on her body with an intoxicated look on his face. Slap! A 5-finger handprint appeared on the face of the romantic President Qin. Shameless! Shameless! She was extremely weak, and her voice was hoarse. She wanted to get up, but her legs were pressed down by him, and she couldn't sit up at all. She struggled for a while and then fell down heavily. Qin Anlin had never been slapped by a woman before, not to mention that he had saved her. He tore her clothes because her clothes were wet. If this went on, she would have a fever. Just like that, she even slapped him in the face. Qin Anlin's lips curled into a sneer. "Pei Chi, do I, Qin Anlin, need to rape a woman?" She glared at him. Her eyes were like that of an injured animal, with wariness and a hint of ruthlessness. Very good. She could still be so ruthless to him. Chapter 727. Pei Chi felt a warmth on her face, and then it was boiling hot. His face also turned from normal to red. That was a sign that a man's eyes were moving. She reached out and gave him another slap. Qin Anlin narrowed his eyes. He did not make a sound, nor did he let go of her. One slap. Another slap. Another, and another slap. Finally, Qin Anlin lost his temper. His long and slender fingers clamped onto her sharp little chin, and he leaned forward, pressing his body against hers. Pei Chi, even if you've been abandoned by Tang Yu, you don't have to take it out on me. Also, do you think that I'm trying to take advantage of you, huh? She did not make a sound. In fact, she could not make a sound. Her chin was pinched by him. His slender fingers were strong, and she was forced to open her little mouth. Although she was pale and disheveled, she was still beautiful. Her wet hair was spread on his snow-white pillow like seaweed, and her beautiful little face was slightly red because of her anger. Even because her little mouth was open for a long time, a trace of saliva was slowly dripping from the corner of her mouth. Not knowing why, Qin Anlin did not feel dirty or disheveled. It was actually soft and sweet. His eyes slowly softened, flashing with affection that he himself did not know. His fondness for Pei Chi had been there for a long time, and he had deliberately neglected it. And at this moment, she was on his bed, like a little kitten, glaring at him fiercely, but at the same time, she did not seem to have any lethality. In that instant, Qin Anlin fell in love with the cat. When he noticed that she was about to struggle, he pinched her little chin with one hand, and the other quickly locked both her hands, raised them high, and held them down. She was pinned on the pillow, pinned on Qin Anlin's bed, aware of his intention, her little head twisted frantically, trying to escape from his wolfish kiss. However, she was too weak to resist. Qin Anlin carefully licked the saliva off the corner of her mouth. He had never done this kind of thing. All the women who had sex with him had dressed themselves up beautifully, and their bodies were full of perfume. At this time, Pei Chi's body smelled of muddy water, and it was not a pleasant smell. However, he still seemed to be bewitched. He wasn't in a hurry. He just slowly licked and kissed her like a beast was healing its mother. Pei Chi's eyes widened in embarrassment and anger. Qin Anlin had never been so intoxicated before. He had never trembled with excitement just because he was kissing a woman. She struggled, but it was as weak as a kitten. His lips were right next to hers, and his voice was unbelievably husky. Pei Chi, didn't you say that I wanted to rape you? If I don't do it with you once, wouldn't I be carrying an undeserved reputation? She lay on the bed, her hands and body firmly held by him. She could feel him ready to strike. She didn't struggle anymore, and gently closed her eyes. The meat was sent to his mouth, but Qin Anlin couldn't take a bite. Looking at her expression, Qin Anlin understood for the first time what it meant to have a heart like dead ashes, and what it meant to. Those who had seen the sea could not see the water, and those who had not seen Mount Wu were not clouds. He understood Tang Yu very well. If he had a choice, he would not have abandoned Pei Chi. Although he didn't know the inside story, and although Pei Chi couldn't possibly love him, he thought that this was his chance. It was Tang Yu who didn't want her, and he didn't want to ruin their relationship. Qin Anlin put out the cigarette and walked out. Pei Chi closed her eyes, and her body was still trembling. If Qin Anlin did not stop, she would have been raped by him. She turned her face and smelled the masculine scent on the blanket. On a rainy night, Tang Yu searched for Pei Chi crazily. He had been looking for her ever since old Zhao told him. He had searched Xia City, Rose Garden, and the old Qingshui Road, but he could not find her. She had left her phone at her current place. It seemed that she had made up her mind to leave. Chapter 729. Late at night, on the streets of B City, Tang Yu was soaking wet. He held his phone and ordered Xiao Ran, contact all the banks. If Chi uses 0000 to withdraw money, send me the news immediately. As soon as he said that, the phone was switched off. After a few flashes, it was out of battery. Tang Yu cursed under his breath. He opened the car door and continued to search for Pei Chi-Chi in the rainy night. His heart was burning and his forehead was burning. He must have had a fever, but he couldn't care less. He was worried about her, worried that something might happen to her. He had Tang Xian's phone with him, but it was switched off. After charging his phone in the car, he turned it on again, waiting for news. Tang Yu ran in the rain for the whole night. When the black sports car passed by the road in front of Xia City, his vision became blurry. The car stopped, he opened the car door and walked quickly in one direction. He remembered that a long time ago, when a girl was sad, she squatted there in the rain and cried. Later, he carried her home. It was that night that he couldn't put her down anymore. But there was nothing. The puddles of water glowed coldly in the dark night. Under the shadow of the trees, it looked even colder. Tang Yu stood straight for a while, then left resolutely. He went to the small park she went to, the square in front of Xingyuan building, but she was not there. He dialed Tang Xian's number again and again, but her phone was switched off every time. That night, Tang Yu almost used up all his energy. Late at night, in Qin Anlan's apartment. Qin Anlan only returned to the bedroom after midnight. He changed into a bathrobe and prepared to take a shower. He didn't even look at Pei Chi-Chi. He came out with a towel in one hand and was about to leave the bedroom when he heard moans coming from the bed. Of course, he wouldn't be narcissistic enough to think that Pei Chi-Chi would seduce him. Qin Anlan squinted his eyes and turned on the light. He walked forward and lifted the blanket, only to see Pei Chi-Chi's abnormally red face. Damn it! He cursed. Sitting on the side of the bed, he helped her up with one hand and probed her body with the other. It was frighteningly hot. Qin Anlan frowned and looked at her red face. She had lost most of her consciousness. He sneered. It would be good if he was burnt silly. Pei Chi-Chi, if you burn yourself silly, I'll take care of you. But it was just a thought. In the middle of the night, he called his assistant to deliver the medicine. The door was opened and closed without letting anyone in. Qin Anlan's assistant stood at the door, touched his nose, and was a little surprised. There was a woman in President Qin's house, right? When did President Qin treat his illness by playing with women? If you're sick and can't serve me, then scram. No, President Qin would never bring a woman here. He always settled things in the hotel, or directly in his office. In that case, the woman inside must have a special identity. Terry stood there for a long time, wanting to know but not daring to ask. In the end, he left. Qin Anlan fed Pei Chi-Chi some medicine, then fed him some water. She was still in a daze, and she was much cuter than before. Qin Anlan reached out and touched the blanket. It was full of cold sweat. He went to get a new set of pajamas. Holding her in one hand, he changed into the pajamas with the other. She was still in a daze, so he changed into the pajamas for her. But seeing her clean and relaxed, he felt much better. He ordered himself not to care too much about her. Anyway, he would get rid of her at dawn. Chapter 730. However, Qin Anlan still stayed by her side until dawn. He didn't even close his eyes. When the sky was just starting to brighten, he walked to the bedside and took her phone. It was a pink phone that only little girls would use. It didn't look like it belonged to Pei Chi-Chi. He helped to charge it. When he turned it on, there were hundreds of missed calls. They were all from Tang Yu. Just then, the phone in Qin Anlan's hand rang. The caller was still Tang Yu. Qin Anlan looked at the big bed and walked out with the phone. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and answered the phone. I'm Qin Anlan. Tang Yu sat in the car. His tired body suddenly stiffened. Qin Anlin. Why was Tang Xian's phone in Qin Anlin's hands? He didn't speak immediately. Qin Anlin smiled. Chi-Chi is still sleeping. Do you want her to answer the phone? Tang Yu hung up. Qin Anlin smiled. When he was about to return to the bedroom to put the phone back, he saw Pei Chi-Chi standing at the bedroom door with a pale face. Did you hear it? He didn't avoid it and returned the phone to her. Tang Yu should be here in half an hour. Pei Chi-Chi was wearing his shirt and pants. He looked at her. Do you want to wait for him? Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything. She took the phone from his hand and looked up. Thank you. After saying that, she walked past him and opened the door. Qin Anlin stood for a while and suddenly said, I said you're sleeping here. Do you want to explain? Pei Chi-Chi's fingers were on the door handle. She said calmly, no need. Qin Anlin watched her leave. When the door closed, he found that his eyes were a little wet. He let out a long sigh. He couldn't believe that he let her go just like that. When did he, Qin Anlin, become so kind to let a woman he was interested in, lie on his bed, and he didn't take her? Pei Chi-Chi walked out of Qin Anlin's neighborhood and withdrew 10,000 yuan from the nearest bank. She quickly got on a bus and left. After a dozen stops, she got off the bus and found a bank that was already open. She withdrew 200,000 yuan from her card and put it in a small package. There were tens of millions of cash in that card, but she only withdrew 200,000. When she came out, she held the card and stared at it for a long time. In the end, she folded it in half and threw it into the dustbin. It was like she was saying goodbye to the past. She didn't need it anymore. She threw it away. Finally, she took a taxi to the bus station and bought a ticket to H City. She got into the car. The interior of the car was a little crowded, and the smell was a little unpleasant. However, this was real life. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her head and looked at the ticket in her hand. After looking at it for a long time, she leaned her head against the window. Perhaps, as she would never come back, the car started slowly. It slowly drove out of the crowded bus station and headed for a distant city in the south. By the time Tang Yu arrived at Qin Anlin's apartment, it was already half an hour later. Qin Anlin opened the door and looked at Tang Yu's sorry state. He said calmly, she has left. How could Tang Yu leave so easily? He called out Pei Chi-Chi's name and searched everywhere. Qin Anlin didn't stop him and let him search everywhere. Tang Yu walked into the bedroom and was stunned. Pei Chi-Chi wasn't there, but there was a torn piece of clothing on the floor. It was Pei Chi-Chi's. He walked over slowly and squatted down to pick it up. Chapter 731. Qin Anlin said lazily, you've already broken up with her. Even if there's something going on between us, it's not something immoral, is it? Tang Yu's jaw tightened and he stood up slowly. What did you do to her? Is it important? Qin Anlin sneered. Tang Yu, shouldn't you be more concerned about your fiancée than your ex-wife? After he said that, Tang Yu threw a punch at him. Qin Anlin caught it easily and looked at him. She has a fever and she's all wet. I just helped her change her clothes and you can't stand it anymore. Tang Yu, since you love her so much, why did you let go? Why did you agree to be engaged to Shen Lian? What's the deal between the two of you? Tang Yu narrowed his eyes and Qin Anlin let go of him. Since you're going to be engaged to Shen Lian, then don't get involved with Pei Chi-Chi anymore, because, Qin Anlin looked into his eyes and said word by word, because it will hurt her. Tang Yu's face was expressionless as he looked at Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin suddenly smiled bitterly. You know what, Tang Yu, you should be grateful that she loves you so much. Otherwise, I wouldn't have let her go like this. Tang Yu's handsome face tensed up. After a while, he held his hand and left. As he walked, his phone rang. It was Xiao Ran. Xiao Ran's voice was a little anxious. President Chi-Chi just withdrew money twice. One was at the entrance of President Qin's neighborhood and the other was at the bank counter on Fully Road. 200,000. Tang Yu had already gone downstairs with his phone in one hand and opened the car door with the other. Tell me the exact location. After Xiao Ran said that, he drove there directly, but Pei Chi-Chi was long gone. Tang Yu searched through B City but didn't find Pei Chi-Chi. She seemed to have disappeared. She took her ID card with her and nothing else. That bank card was no longer used. Tang Yu believed that she had thrown it away. However, he did not ask anyone to report the loss of the card. He held a sliver of hope in his heart. If one day she ran out of money, that card would still be with her, but in the end, the card still returned to his hands. Xiao Ran was the one who returned the black gold card to him. Placing it on the table gently, Xiao Ran said softly, CEO, the bank found this in the trash can at the entrance. The surveillance showed that Chi-Chi threw it away after leaving the bank. Tang Yu sat there, his eyes lowered as he looked at the card quietly. In just a few days, he had lost a lot of weight, and even his face was a little pale. Xiao Ran felt a little sad. Pei Chi-Chi's departure was a big blow to the president. She stood there and wanted to say something, but before she could say it, the office door was pushed open. Shen Lian came in her 7-inch high heels. She first looked at Xiao Ran, then walked towards Tang Yu. Xiao Ran nodded and left. Tang Yu glanced at Shen Lian. With a calm expression, he picked up the card with his slender fingers and put it in the drawer. Shen Lian glanced at the card and then reached out to hug Tang Yu's arm. Her voice was gentle. Let's try on the dress later. Haven't you tried it already? Tang Yu smiled faintly, but Shen Lian looked at him. His smile didn't enter her eyes. Chapter 732. Tang Yu broke free from her grip. There's a lunch party at noon. Besides, men's suits are always the same. There's nothing much to try on. Shen Lian wiped away the smile on her face. She stared into his eyes and asked slowly, if it were Pei Chi-Chi today, would you go? Would you still be so nonchalant about it? Tang Yu didn't answer her. Sometimes, silence was a tacit agreement. Shen Lian raised her head. Tang Yu, I've tolerated it when you've been looking for her all over the world. But we're getting engaged the day after tomorrow. Are you sure you want to get her back? I've said it before. You're not allowed to interfere in her affairs. Tang Yu's voice was cold. Shen Lian couldn't take it anymore. I'm not allowed to interfere. Tang Yu, don't forget that you're her beloved brother now. Are you going to get her back and sleep with you? To be your sister and lie under you at the same time? Shen Lian. Tang Yu's voice was even colder. Don't go overboard. Am I going overboard? Shen Lian said coldly, we're getting engaged. How can there be a third person between the two of us? She couldn't do it. Believe it or not, if she appears in front of me, I can save her or destroy her. Shen Lian blurted out in a moment of desperation. But she regretted it the moment she said it. She looked at Tang Yu's cold eyes and felt a chill run down her spine. She stammered, Tang Yu, I didn't mean it that way. I'm just a little angry. Tang Yu looked at her for a long time and said in a gentler tone, of course, I believe you won't do anything stupid. As he said that, he flipped open the document and said indifferently, I still have something to do. You can go back first. Shen Lian wanted to say something, but Tang Yu's face was filled with the word, see her off. She was a little dazed. Were they really getting engaged? Or was it just her wishful thinking? But she didn't dare to ask. She was afraid that he would answer in the affirmative. She said something stupid. Tang Yu, don't forget the contract we signed. If you break up the marriage and get together with Pei Chi, then, say no more. Tang Yu interrupted her. Shen Lian didn't say anything for a long time. After a while, she walked out. Xiao Ran was still guarding outside. Seeing that Shen Lian's expression was completely different from when she went in, he sighed in his heart. Why bother? It was obvious that the CEO didn't like him. Shen Lian arrogantly did not look at Xiao Ran. She always felt that Xiao Ran was looking at her with ridicule in his eyes. Xiao Ran was about to return to his office when the elevator door opened and Manager Zhu came out. Seeing Xiao Ran, Manager Zhu quickened his steps and entered the secretariat with Xiao Ran, which was the most gossipy place in the company. After a while, Manager Zhu held the coffee that Xiao Ran made and leaned against the office chair. I saw Shen Lian just now. Don't be fooled by her usual arrogance. Chapter 733. Manager Zhu flipped his hair and said coolly, if this woman dares to do anything to me, I'll tear her apart. At most, I'll quit this job. I won't starve to death. I hate this kind of white lotus the most in my life. The second and third secretaries all agreed. Manager Zhu finished his coffee and sighed, President, that little sheep used to be a good person. She was young and beautiful, and she never caused trouble in Xingyuan. Who said otherwise? The secretaries spent the entire morning chatting and gossiping. In the president's office, after Shen Lian left, Tang Yu looked up from the documents with deep eyes. He took a cigarette from the table, lit it, and took a long drag. Slowly, there was a touch of ruthlessness in his eyes. That was the ruthlessness that Tang Yu had never shown to others easily. 2 days later, the engagement was set in Jin Taihe's hotel, which was arranged by Shen Lian. In fact, she had arranged the engagement from the beginning to the end. From the media announcement to the engagement venue, the dress, the jewelry, and the interview that day, she had arranged everything properly to ensure that nothing went wrong. It was luxurious and low-key. It was low-key because Tang Yu had been married once. Shen Lian sat in front of the mirror in the styling salon, looking at herself in the mirror. Mrs. Tang, you're so beautiful today. The stylist behind her was also very flattering and knew what the client was thinking. Sure enough, Shen Lian was overjoyed by the Mrs. Shen, and she looked a little shy. It's just an engagement. As for marriage, Tang Yu had never mentioned it. She didn't dare to ask. The stylist finally confirmed that there was no problem and smiled, that will happen sooner or later. Maybe it made Shen Lian feel better, and Shen Lian couldn't help smiling. She wore a white off-shoulder dress today, which was very simple and elegant, and the diamond necklace was very eye-catching. When she left the salon and got into the black limousine downstairs, she was still a little disappointed. Because on the day of the engagement, she had hoped that Tang Yu would pick her up in person, but he didn't. In her heart, she could vaguely feel that from the beginning to the end, she was singing a one-man show. However, no matter how lonely she was, she had to finish this show. Because this was her dream for a long time. She wanted to marry Tang Yu. He had once asked her how their marriage would continue if he did not have feelings for her body. Shen Lian was a little hesitant, but the devil in her heart eventually won over her rationality. Shen Lian was sitting in the car. The driver was from the Shen family. He said a few words and then started the car. Miss, there are drinks in the cabinet in front. I just went to buy them. Would you like a cup? The driver asked considerately. He knew that Shen Lian had come early in the morning to prepare and hadn't eaten anything. Shen Lian shook her head. The driver didn't insist and continued to drive. However, he noticed that his mistress didn't look too good. Why did this engagement feel like a divorce? Sigh, if Mr. Shen had been fine, he would never have allowed Miss to get engaged to Mr. Tang. Why did a good lady have to marry a divorced man? The driver thought to himself. He looked at the red light in front of him and wanted to stop the car. However, when he stepped on the brake, the car didn't react at all. It still went straight ahead. There was a truck in front of them. Seeing that it was about to hit the truck, the driver hurriedly made a turn, but the truck hit the green belt in the middle of the turntable. Chapter 734. The front of the car was smoking, and the back half of the car was stuck to the ground. Bright red blood slowly flowed out from the back seat. Bit by bit, it seeped into the cement. The scene was chaotic, and screams could be heard everywhere. Shen Lian struggled to open her eyes and look around. She wanted to move, but she couldn't. Her leg hurt. She wanted to move a little, but she realized that she could not exert any strength. The pain was slowly becoming numb. Finally, she fell into a coma. Half an hour later, the ambulance and fire truck came together and worked together to get Shen Lian out. At that time, the doctor looked at the bloody foot and shook his head. He guessed that the leg below the calf would probably have to be amputated. When Shen Lian was carried out, she woke up in a daze for a short while. Her white dress was stained with blood, and blood was still dripping down. Tick-tock, is it raining? But why was there a blue sky and white clouds in the sky? Shen Lian's eyes blinked listlessly, very very slowly. Because just like that, she felt that she had exhausted all the energy in her body. Why couldn't she cry? It was so painful. She looked at the sky blankly and slowly closed her eyes. Tang Yu, the engagement. Is it over? 3 days later, Shen Lian woke up in the ward. She opened her eyes and looked around. It was all white. Was she still in the hospital? She heard a gentle voice, Miss Shen, you're finally awake. You've been in a coma for 3 days. Shen Lian looked at him and moved her head. She looked around, but there was no one she wanted to see. Her lips were dry as she said, Where's Tang Yu? The doctor was stunned, but after a while, he seemed to remember something and said apologetically, We contacted Mrs. Shen directly. As for Mr. Tang, we didn't see him. Shen Lian's lifeless eyes blinked lightly again. He didn't come. Yes, why would he come? Shen Lian was in a daze for a while. She asked hoarsely, Where's my mother? The doctor took the information from the nurse and signed it. He answered her, Mrs. Shen came yesterday. He came yesterday. She was still in a coma, and her mother did not stay by her side. In the end, she hated her, and in the end, Shen Zhongshan was more important than her. Shen Lian smiled absent-mindedly. She sat up and wanted to get off the bed, but as soon as he moved his leg, his foot felt light. She was stunned for a moment before she cried out hoarsely. Ah! Her feet, where were her feet? Shen Lian's eyes widened and her face was filled with horror. She lost her voice and couldn't speak. She kept looking at the doctor as her body started to convulse uncontrollably. Where did her left foot go? Where did it go? The doctor immediately asked the nurse to press down on Shen Lian and give her a sedative injection. Shen Lian's long hair was scattered on the pure white pillow, and her originally frantic expression slowly calmed down. Her eyes were wide open, and the muscles on her face were still twitching unnaturally. When she woke up again, Shen Lian stopped talking. No one comforted her except the doctors and nurses. But she didn't need a doctor or a nurse. She needed her mother and Tang Yu. But where did all of them go? No one cared about her. She had nothing left. Without a foot, Tang Yu wouldn't want her anymore. No, even if he didn't want her, she would never allow him to be with Pei Chi. Chapter 735. Shen Lian had actually heard it. Yes, she was crazy. She had already lost everything and there was nothing more to lose. She started to lose her mind and even stopped eating. She screamed hoarsely, asking Tang Yu to come and see her. After spilling all the food again, the nurse cleaned up the floor and walked out to close the door. No matter how good-tempered she was, she still had to complain. Who does she think she is? If she doesn't want to come, even if she begs him, he might not necessarily come. Besides, she doesn't even have a leg and she still wants a man like Mr. Tang to marry her. Actually, the news had already spread that Shen Lian and Tang Yu's engagement had never been announced by Xinyuan Corporation. So, at this moment, Shen Lian was in the hospital and Tang Yu had not come. Rumors were spreading that the Shen family had a hereditary insanity. Didn't Shen Zhongshan become demented? Perhaps the engagement was planned by Shen Lian herself. As the two nurses were talking, Dr. Zhang happened to come over. When he heard what they said, he stomped his feet and said gently, throwing a tantrum again. Yes, Dr. Zhang. If not for the hospital's rules, I really want to put the food on her head, one of the nurses harumphed. Dr. Zhang reprimanded, the patient is not in a good mood. We have to be patient. The nurse was indignant but she only dared to mutter, she's already in this state and no one is coming to see her. It means that she's not a good person. Dr. Zhang wanted to say something but seeing that he was usually easy to talk to, the nurse even dared to joke, Dr. Zhang, don't be soft-hearted just because she's pretty. With that, she turned and ran away. Dr. Zhang shook his head helplessly and pushed the door open. Shen Lian laid there motionlessly, staring at the ceiling. Why didn't you ask him to come? Why didn't he come? Dr. Zhang stood there and looked at this pale, disheveled, yet beautiful woman. In fact, even though she was in such a state and had lost a leg, he still had to look up to her. Because of the power behind her. Because she wanted to marry a man like Tang Yu. So, he would not tell her that they actually knew each other in the past. However, she had forgotten. That time at the bar, she was drunk. That night, he was the one who had sex with her. He knew that he was only one of her countless men. He knew that having sex with her that night was like drinking a cup of poison. But he still couldn't control it. Just like that, he couldn't help but want her. He didn't sleep for the whole night, he was excited the whole time. But at this moment, she was so fragile, completely different from that night. However, when he looked at her, he still felt a little moved. He was destined to keep this feeling at the bottom of his heart for the rest of his life, because he knew that there were some things that he was destined to be unable to overcome, such as power. As for him, he was not that ambitious. He just wanted to be a doctor who healed the wounded and saved the dying. Dr. Zhang had just pushed the door open when Shen Lian threw something at him, barely grazing his forehead. A stream of dark red blood flowed down from his forehead. Dr. Zhang reached out his hand to wipe it. It was a little hot. He quietly cleaned it up with a tissue and said in a low voice, "It's not that you can't walk. The 3D printing technology is so mature now that it can make very convenient prosthetics." Chapter 736. She waved her hand. "Get out. I don't want to see you, and I don't want to wear those stupid prosthetics. Even if I can't walk for the rest of my life, I won't wear them." As she was too agitated, she seemed a little hysterical. She sat there panting, and glared at Dr. Zhang. "Don't try to convince me with your big talk. I'm telling you, I won't do it even if I die." Dr. Zhang smiled faintly. "All right then. Miss Shen has plenty of money. I think it wouldn't be a problem to hire 10 people to carry her back and forth every day. Oh yes, the stairs are all humanized now. It's for the handicapped. Shen Lian had thought that he would continue to persuade her and was ready to throw another tantrum. But when Dr. Zhang said this, she was so angry that she couldn't speak. Dr. Zhang helped her lie down and said calmly, "If you don't want to be in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, then be braver." He paused. With the current technology, you can make it completely invisible. Of course, you have to work hard. It might be a little harder. Shen Lian said mockingly, "What about my husband? When he makes love to me, does he have to take off that stupid, fake leg?" Dr. Zhang was stunned and then said softly, "If he loves you, he won't care about this." "He doesn't love me." Shen Lian's voice was sharp. "Are you happy?" "He doesn't love me and will hate me even more in the future." She lifted her empty leg. "See? No man would like a leg like this." Shen Lian smiled sinisterly. "So what if Tang Yu didn't like it? He wouldn't dare to break the contract. The contract he signed with her was enough to restrict him. Unless she died." Suddenly, Shen Lian's expression changed. "She's dead. She's dead. Who benefited the most from this?" "Yes, Tang Yu didn't benefit. He couldn't get everything that Jean Taihe had. But if she died, he would be free." Shen Lian's body trembled. She covered her face with her fingers and clawed at it with all her might. "No way, no way, no way," she said with all her might. "No." Shen Lian's face was full of tears. She couldn't take this anymore. Xing Yuan's office. Tang Yu stood quietly in front of the floor-to-ceiling window with a cigarette in his hand. Ever since Pei Chichi left, he had been smoking all the time. The phone in his pocket rang. He picked it up. No one knew what the other side said, but a sneer appeared on Tang Yu's face. It was her luck that she didn't die. "There's no need," Tang Yu said coldly and hung up the phone. It would be impossible for him to succeed in the future. He didn't need to use the same method twice. "Shen Lian, this is payback for what you did to Chi-Chi. Payback for the time when you allowed someone to pour acid on her. As for the rest, we'll slowly figure it out." Xiao Ran pushed the door open and called out to the CEO. When Tang Yu turned around, there was a violent look in his eyes. Even Xiao Ran, who had been with him for a long time, couldn't help but be stunned. The CEO didn't always show his true colors. However, Xiao Ran was an experienced veteran. He quickly adjusted himself and said softly, "CEO, we found Miss Pei's whereabouts." Tang Yu's fingers that were holding the cigarette started to tremble. He looked at Xiao Ran with a deep gaze. Then, he took a deep puff of the cigarette and said, "Where?" "City H." Xiao Ran was brief and direct. "She's studying photography at a university. She's working part-time." She paused. She rented a small apartment in the suburbs. Her life is quite simple. Chapter 737. 200,000 yuan was not enough to live a good life in H City. Just that small suite alone cost 3,000 to 4,000 yuan a month. There was also food, supplies, and school fees. Tang Yu walked over and put out his cigarette in the ashtray. "Give me the address." Xiao Ran had already prepared it. He handed the note to Tang Yu and left. Tang Yu lowered his head and read it over and over again. His hand holding the note was pale with concern. 3 days later. At the entrance of H University. A black limousine was parked at the entrance of the university. The cool body attracted the curiosity of some students. Tang Yu sat in the car and looked at the direction of the entrance quietly. The car window was rolled down a little. He smoked and occasionally flicked the ash out. Although it was a university, some girls, especially the good-looking ones, often went in and out of all kinds of expensive cars. A car worth more than 20 million parked here naturally made some of the campus belles restless. A woman opened the car door and asked softly, "How many bottles of water for one night?" This was their secret code. 1 bottle of water for 1,000 yuan. Tang Yu continued to smoke and said coldly, "Get out." The campus belles had never been humiliated like this before. If it wasn't for the car and the man's good looks, she would never have taken the initiative to be friendly. She slammed the door shut and left. Tang Yu frowned deeply. Pei Chi found such an unethical university. University. It didn't live up to its name. He sat quietly and didn't know what he was waiting for. Maybe it was just to see her. After sitting like this for half an hour, Pei Chi finally walked out of the campus. From afar, she was still very thin, but her complexion looked better. She was wearing an ordinary black t-shirt, jeans, and a dark trench coat. Although simple, she looked very elegant. She held a stack of books in her hands and walked slowly out of the university to the bus stop. She stood there and waited for 5 minutes before getting on a bus. Tang Yu drove behind her. After about 5 or 6 stops, Pei Chi got off, and Tang Yu watched her walk into the subway station. He immediately stopped the car, threw the car on the road, and entered the subway. He was afraid that she would see him, so he followed her from afar. He watched as she slowly bought the ticket and stood there quietly waiting for the subway. She had always been calm, so calm that no one could feel her existence. Tang Yu looked at her, and his heart ached a little. She looked so calm on the outside, but what about on the inside? Was her heart at peace? That place was still riddled with holes, or had it healed? If Tang Yu had to choose, he would rather she still be riddled with wounds. Chi, maybe it hurts, but I hope you do. Because one day, when your wounds heal, I will no longer have a place in your heart. The subway arrived. She got on the subway, and he followed her into another carriage without her noticing. He knew where she lived, where she got off, and he even knew that she would work at the coffee shop at 6:00 in the evening. Pei Chi entered an old 4-story building. It was really old. The red brick building had long been stained with amber, and it looked dilapidated. There were some green vines crawling on the walls, adding to the business. Tang Yu stood below, and his heart ached a little. His Chi lived here. But he had no choice. He could only stand here, and there was no possibility of providing a better life for her. He could force her to go back, but she would run. The next time, he believed that he would never be able to find her again. Chapter 738. Pei Chi returned to her apartment and leaned against the door to calm herself down. Her body couldn't be compared to before. She got tired easily, and her face was still pale after such a long time. He opened the fridge, took out some ingredients, made a simple dish, and put it on a plate with steam rising from it. She sat alone at the small dining table and ate dinner alone. But as she ate, she started to get distracted, because she wasn't used to it. Her eyes felt a little sore and bitter. She put down the fork in her hand. She sat there in a daze. After a long time, she held it again and started to eat the cold noodles. Pei Chi, it's nothing. You can start again. You can forget about your injuries and Tang Yu. She went back to her room and sat on the bed to tidy up the lecture notes for the day. She was studying photography at University, but it wasn't an official course. It was a collaboration between a training class and University, and she could start her internship after 1 year. When she saw the recruitment advertisement, she decided to go without hesitation. Most of the reasons were that she wanted to have something to do, and she felt that she could travel around the world with a camera, but when she went, she found out that it was a class organized by a certain magazine to train photographers. The magazine was quite famous, but no one seemed to believe it. In the end, there were only 4 people in the class, 3 girls and 1 boy. Pei Chi quietly watched for an hour. She rubbed her eyes and took her phone to check the time. It was already time for her to work. She put on a jacket, changed into slippers, and carried a small bag out. It was only a few bus stops away from the cafe she worked at. Under the setting sun, she stood under a French sycamore tree. She saw the number 52 bus coming. The bus stopped slowly and she got on. The black sports car followed the bus, and the body of the car glowed a faint gold under the setting sun. He followed her and watched as she went straight into a Starbucks. She changed into her work clothes and tied her long hair into a ponytail. She didn't put on any makeup, and her elegant appearance attracted a lot of attention. She stood behind the cashier and served the customers with a smile. Tang Yu sat in the car outside and looked at her, but he felt that her smile was filled with exhaustion. His gaze was locked on her, watching her work, watching her life, watching her smile. Tang Yu's body leaned against the back of the chair and he let out a long sigh. There were clearly a few cashiers, but most of the customers behind her were male. He saw that there were about 5 or 6 men standing in front of her cashier, and his eyes were filled with displeasure. The car window rolled down, and seeing the 2 girls passing by, he called out to them. He took out $2,000 from his wallet. "This is for coffee. Go to counter number 3 over there and buy 50 cups of coffee." The 2 girls were also going in for coffee, but when they looked at Tang Yu, they felt as if they were looking at a lunatic. But looking at Grandpa Mao's fair skin, he decided that he was willing. "Don't tell anyone," Tang Yu said indifferently. The 2 girls didn't understand at first, but when they reached the 3rd queue, they saw that the girl at the cashier was particularly beautiful. It turned out that the legendary Cinderella really existed, but she had to be beautiful enough. 50 cups would keep Pei Chi busy for a while. But this way, it would save a lot of effort. Customers came one after another, and she was tired. It was much easier to deal with them in one place. It also gave her time to let her imagination run wild. Chapter 739. Outside, it started to rain. By the time Pei Chi got off work, the rain was getting heavier, and there were very few pedestrians outside. The dim yellow streetlights were wet from the rain, so the light was cold. She stood at the entrance of the shop and waited for a long time, but there was no sign of the rain stopping. It was about a 5-minute walk from the bus stop. Tang Yu's car was parked 50 meters away. The car lights were on, and the windshield wipers kept moving, blocking his face. He watched her stand there, watched her hesitate, watched her put her jacket over her head, and started to run hard towards the bus stop. Every step was so clearly trampled on this quiet night, the thin and cool water. Just like that night when they first met, she also ran towards him like this. The windshield wipers were still moving, cutting through Tang Yu's expression. Finally, she passed by his car, and it was just a flash. It was just like in the past year, she just bloomed and disappeared in his life. She was in the rain, and he was sitting in the car. Tang Yu's eyes were a little moist as he watched her walk to the bus stop, take off her jacket, look at it, and hug it again. She must be very cold. The bus stop was very quiet, and the bus didn't come for a long time. There weren't many pedestrians on a rainy autumn night. Pei Chi stood there alone, looking even more slender and thin. He remembered that she was once a little chubby because of him, especially when he pinched her belly. It was soft. Tang Yu parked his car far away. He looked at her, reached out for his phone, and dialed a number. "I'll arrange for a Route 52 bus to pass by at Route 00. He didn't know what the person on the other end was complaining about, but he still went to make the arrangements. It wasn't a bus company, but a brand new bus with a number 52 plate in front. Later, this bus would appear at a certain time, and the only passenger would be Pei Chi-Chi. Not long after, the Route 52 bus came slowly, broke through the thin puddles, and stopped at the bus stop with a squeak. Tang Yu watched Pei Chi-Chi get on the bus and started the car. And behind his car, a real Route 52 bus slowly pulled in. The driver rubbed his eyes. Did he see it wrong? The bus in front was Route 52. But if it was Route 52, then was he driving a fake Route 52 bus? Pei Chi-Chi returned home and walked up the dark stairs. This building was old, and the stairs were outdoor, so it was a little slippery in the rain. Tang Yu parked the car, watched her go upstairs, and watched her disappear at the staircase. He rolled down the window and looked upstairs. He watched as her light came on. After staring at him for a long time, his eyes felt a little hot. He reached for the pack of cigarettes on the console, took out a cigarette, and lit it. Under the illumination of the scarlet cigarette butt, his face looked so desolate. Upstairs, Pei Chi-Chi took off her wet clothes and took a hot shower. Halfway through the shower, the power suddenly went out, and the entire building was shrouded in darkness. Tang Yu sat in the car and seemed to hear a scream. It seemed to be Pei Chi-Chi's voice. He raised his head and looked at the dark window. The power had gone out. But it was only for a short while before the power was restored, and the world was lit up again. Tang Yu had already gotten out of the car because he was worried. He looked up at the direction of her window. Chapter 740. He could even see her wearing a white nightgown, standing by the window and drying her hair. Although he couldn't see her clearly, it couldn't stop others from spying on her. Tang Yu pursed his lips. After taking 2 puffs, he put away the cigarette in his hand and went into the car to make a phone call. After a day, when Pei Chi-Chi came back, she found that her curtains had been changed into 2 layers, a thin layer on the inside and a thick layer of cloth on the outside. She called the landlord to thank her because she had requested to change the curtains before, but the landlord had always been reluctant. But this time, she changed it so readily, and the color was her favorite. The landlord accepted her thanks and looked at the bankbook in her hand with mixed feelings. She had already sold the house, sold it at twice the market price, and in the future, Pei Chi-Chi's rent would belong to her. There was only one condition, and that was that she had to agree to whatever Pei Chi-Chi asked of her. Just like that, Tang Yu followed Pei Chi-Chi without being discovered. Looking into her eyes, he tried hard to find a trace of her nostalgia for the past, but he couldn't find it. He couldn't find a trace of nostalgia for him on her little face. It was as if she should have belonged here, as if she had forgotten about him. She lived a peaceful life, went to school, went home, and went to work. Her life was self-disciplined and simple, but in his opinion, she lived a hard life. The treasure in his hands was now living such a hard life alone in a southern city. Was she planning to never see him again? He knew that it was useless to follow her like this, but he still followed her uncontrollably. Looking at her cold little face, his heart would ache, but when she smiled occasionally, he would smile too. A few days later, a phone call forced Tang Yu to leave. He didn't return to B City, but flew directly to America. He stayed there for a whole month, and when he returned to B City, it was already late autumn. On Monday, Tang Yu went to the company. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, Xiao Ran followed closely. President Shen is here. Tang Yu stopped in his tracks and asked as he walked. She was discharged. Xiao Ran grunted, then hesitated. President Shen didn't come alone. Tang Yu tilted his head. Before Xiao Ran could say anything, a person slowly walked out from the side. It was someone they were all familiar with. Meng Qingqing. Tang Yu looked at him and smiled bitterly. Qingqing, don't tell me you came back to work. Of course not. Shen Lian's voice sounded. She slowly came over in her wheelchair, looked up at Tang Yu, and said word by word, now, Meng Qingqing is the general manager of Jin Taihe's headquarters. Tang Yu, what do you think? Tang Yu smiled and walked into his office. What do you want me to think? Shen Lian was a little angry and gritted her teeth. Xiao Ran smiled. I'll go make coffee. As she said that, she looked at Meng Qingqing, a little confused. Meng Qingqing couldn't mix around with someone like Shen Lian. She felt that the world was a fantasy. Tang Yu had already sat behind his desk. He placed his 10 fingers on the table, forming the shape of a pyramid. After a moment of silence, he said, I thought that the person who followed you here would be your lawyer, not Qingqing. Shen Lian raised her chin. Tang Yu, you know what I want. Chapter 741. Tang Yu looked at her with his deep eyes. After a long time, he smiled faintly and said, yes. But Shen Lian, I have never thought about breaking up the marriage. As the future Mrs. Tang, you are overthinking it. He had been calm, and Shen Lian could not hit him at all. She gritted her teeth and said, then why didn't you go to the hospital to see me for more than a month? The smile on Tang Yu's face became even colder. Shen Lian, did I sign a contract with you? Do I have to love you? Shen Lian was stunned for a moment, and then she laughed. She laughed so hard that tears came out of her eyes. She raised her chin and stared at Tang Yu. Yes, you have no obligation to love me. Because you have never forgotten Pei Chi, that bitch. Seeing the coldness in Tang Yu's eyes, Shen Lian smiled coldly and said, Tang Yu, I am not as good as you. I can't beat you. The contract they signed was a trap. He did sign a divorce with Pei Chi, but he did not specify that he was going to marry Shen Lian. And now, Tang Yu's attitude was very clear. If she forced him to marry her, he would fight to the death. Tang Yu's expression was indifferent, and he looked at her calmly. I know what you are thinking. It is nothing more than a compromise. You want to keep your chastity for Pei Chi, but you don't want to lose everything you signed. So. Shen Lian raised her chin and sneered. I will fulfill your wish. Tang Yu, I want to see if you can endure time and Pei Chi's feelings for you. Her expression was strange. Can you expect your biological sister to break through the mortal world and love you again? Stop dreaming. You are the one who aborted her child. You are the one who caused Tang Xan to lose her life. Tang Yu had been quiet the whole time. His heart was a little cold. Shen Lian was half right. He really wasn't sure that Chi would return to him after he settled everything. There were too many variables in the midst of this. It was impossible for him to go to H City all the time. Firstly, he didn't have enough time. Secondly, he didn't want to arouse Shen Lian's suspicion. In a long, long time, would she meet another person as wonderful as Jinrong? At that time, should he fulfill her wish? Or should he continue to pull her back into this cruel world? Tang Yu's eyes were cold. After a moment, he smiled and said, Shen Lian, tell me your main point. Shen Lian stared into his eyes. I want you to be my fiancé. Of course. Tang Yu was still indifferent. Also, congratulations on your recovery. His tone was formal. Where was the intimacy of an engaged couple? It was as if he was mercilessly mocking Shen Lian. Shen Lian paused for a moment. Then, her gaze fell on his face. Her voice was a little fierce. Tang Yu, did you do it? Tang Yu looked up and quietly looked into her eyes. If you suspect me, you can take revenge on me. I think that what you have in your hands is enough to make me a sinner. He generously handed the choice to Shenlian. He didn't admit it, nor did he deny it. Shenlian's face was pale. Meng Qingqing, who was at the side, already knew that Shenlian was no match for Tang Yu. Others might not know, but he knew Tang Yu very well. He had always been an overly calm man. He could make the most intuitive and correct judgment in the worst situation. He could also play the other party in the palm of his hand. Chapter 742. As for Tang Yu, he was patient enough, so he temporarily gave up on Pei Qi. This was something that Shenlian would never be able to do in her entire life. Meng Qingqing was not clear about the contents of their agreement, but he thought that it must have something to do with Xing Yuan or even the Lin family's foundation. It was a thread between Tang Yu and Shenlian. If both sides were careless, this thread would be broken. That result was not what Tang Yu wanted, nor was it what Shenlian wanted. Shenlian grasped the external, while Tang Yu must have grasped Shenlian's mentality and played a good hand in the face of adversity. He stood there quietly, dazed for a moment. When he came back to his senses, Shenlian had actually left. I told her that I wanted to talk to you alone. Tang Yu stood up and walked to the wine cabinet in the corner. He rarely used this wine cabinet because he was self-disciplined. At this moment, he wanted to have a drink with Meng Qingqing. Perhaps this would be the last time they stood here and had a drink together. Tang Yu poured a glass for himself and Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing walked over and took it. Why do you want to go to Shenlian's place? Is it because of Tang Xin? Tang Yu leaned against him and asked calmly. Meng Qingqing held the glass and lowered his eyes. After a while, he smiled bitterly. Who knows? He looked up and finished the glass in one gulp. Then he looked at Tang Yu and said calmly, maybe I don't want to see you too peaceful. I know that Shenlian can't beat you. Tang Yu held the glass but didn't drink. He looked at Meng Qingqing calmly. Qingqing, do you think that you can beat me with her? Maybe not. They knew each other too well. Meng Qingqing went straight to the point. But, I believe that with me around, you'll have to work harder. He put down the cup in his hand and walked to the door. Tang Yu stopped him. Qingqing, wait a minute. Meng Qingqing froze and slowly turned around. Tang Yu walked to his desk, took out a photo album from the drawer, and placed it in Meng Qingqing's hands. Tang Xian asked me to pass this to you. Meng Qingqing's fingers were trembling and his drooping eyes were moist. After a while, he opened the door and walked out resolutely. He said to Tang Yu, this won't change anything. Tang Yu looked at his back quietly. After a while, he smiled. Won't change anything. Qingqing, you're far more soft-hearted than you think. If you really want to destroy me, you don't need to look for Shenlian. You just need to tell the truth to Qi. Then, you'll be able to send me to the 18th level of hell. Looking at Qingqing like this, his heart ached a little. Other than Tang Xian, the only person he felt sorry for was Meng Qingqing. Meng Qingqing sat in the car and slowly opened the photo album. On the front page, it was a photo of him and Tang Yu. He was the one who took that photo. Little Tang Xian wasn't too happy at that time. She pouted and stared at him with watery eyes. His eyes were filled with undisguised love. Meng Qingqing's fingers gently stroked the photo. His heart trembled. Tang Xian. She knew. She knew all along. He hurriedly flipped to the back of the album. It was filled with her own photos. From a young age, there were all kinds of photos. They were all very cute and beautiful. But his heart was filled with bitterness. Tang Xian knew that he loved her, but she didn't have him in her heart. Chapter 743. Meng Qingqing quickly covered his eyes with his hands. He was afraid that he would cry and his heart would soften. Because she loved Tang Yu so much, and now he wanted to hurt her beloved brother. If he did that, she would hate him, wouldn't she? At that moment, Meng Qingqing's heart felt like it was being cut by a knife, but he still chose Jin Taihe, and Tang Yu didn't look for him again to persuade him. The days passed just like that. Tang Yu would go to H City once every 2 months, and he might only stay for 1 or 2 days. He could only follow her from afar and watch as she got better and more energetic every time. The pain seemed to have left her, as if she had forgotten about it. Before the new year, he went to America and returned to H City. Pei Chi celebrated the new year alone, and he followed her to the supermarket to buy ingredients. The things she bought were exactly the same as what she bought with Tang Xian that year. At that time, Tang Yu knew that she hadn't let go of him. Pei Chi went home and made a table full of dishes. It was New Year's Eve. Outside the window, fireworks were rising continuously, blooming in the cold night sky. She sat at the dining table, took out her phone, and sent a message to Tang Xian. Happy New Year. Tang Xian, where are you? Can you receive my message? I made a lot of dishes tonight, all of them are your favorites. If I could, I would rather never come to your life. Maybe life will come to an end, but you will leave with such a happy family. You will leave with all the love you have. Do you hate me? There was a knock on the door, and she was dazed for a moment. It was like that year when she and Tang Xian were sitting at the dining table, preparing to have New Year's Eve dinner. The door opened, and it was Tang Yu. Pei Chi smiled. That kind of time would never come again. She slowly got up and opened the door. It was her neighbor, Aunt Sue, who had lived here for a long time. Aunt Sue was holding a big plate of handmade dumplings, full of fillings, and very attractive. Miss Pei, seeing that you're living alone, I thought that girls from the north probably wouldn't pack this during the Lunar New Year. In the south, we have this custom. If you eat this during the Lunar New Year, you'll be lucky next year, Auntie Sue said warmly. Pei Chi opened the door wider and smiled. Thank you, Auntie Sue. I'll go get the plates. She turned around and went to the kitchen. Auntie Sue also saw that her small dining table was filled with dishes that looked, smelled, and looked delicious. Even an old cook like her was a little envious, so she said, Miss Pei really knows how to cook. Do you want to eat together? Pei Chi asked hesitantly. Auntie Sue quickly waved her hand. No need, no need. My old Sue is waiting for me. Pei Chi closed the door. As Auntie Sue closed her own door, she wondered if Pei Chi was eating alone. The expensive car parked downstairs must be her boyfriend, right? She had seen the man twice. He was very good-looking and seemed to be rich. She could smell his elite and manly scent even from a few floors away. She had told her old Sue before, and he said that he had a manly scent too, so he let her smell it. Let her smell it. When Auntie Sue got home, she looked out of the window again. Indeed, the man was here again. She knew that Miss Pei was the only beautiful girl in the entire building. This man must be looking for her. But why was he sitting in the car? Or had he already gone to Miss Pei's house? Chapter 744. Auntie Sue decided that she must pay close attention to the movements next door tonight, to see if there were any strange sounds, such as, oh, or oh, 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 oh. But she waited for the whole night and did not hear what she wanted to hear. There was a table full of dishes for one person. She really could not eat much. At 8:00, Pei Chi leaned against the window to watch the fireworks. The dark night sky was already lit up by the fireworks. One by one, they rose into the night sky. It was so beautiful and dazzling. The sky above City B was probably the same. She leaned against the window and felt a little sleepy. She fell asleep as soon as she returned to her room. In a hazy state, she dreamed of that night. She dreamed that she was being chased and had nowhere to go. She was covered in a thin layer of sweat and pushed open the door behind her. She fell to the ground and looked at Tang Yu sitting on the luxurious sofa in the presidential suite. He was dressed elegantly, and his slender jade-like fingers were supporting his forehead. He was quiet, as if he was asleep. She walked over uncontrollably. She was still wearing the little dress that she had seen him that night. Leaning against him, she placed her hand on his cold face and called out, "Big brother." Pei Chi woke up with a start. Her whole body was covered in a thin layer of sweat, which was sticking to her body. She gasped for air. She had experienced such an absurd dream, but she felt as if she had experienced a lifetime. She lay there for a while until her whole body was cold, then she walked into the bathroom. As the hot water rushed down, her face felt hot, but her eyes were very painful. Brother, so crazy. She had always wanted to forget that person, but she would always have such a dream. It lingered and haunted her like a nightmare. She felt anger and shame, but there was nothing she could do about it. Tang Yu stayed downstairs the whole night and watched her turn on the lights. "Chi, are you sleeping on such a night?" "But I can't sleep. If I don't watch over you, I don't know what else I can do." He did not dare to disturb her, so he could only watch over her from afar. 1 day, 2 days, 1 month, 2 months. They just watched over her like that, each feeling sad. That autumn, Pei Chi entered Jaran magazine as an intern photographer. Everyone called her Master Kansas. His face was so full of beard that it was almost impossible to see his original face. He was quite an imposing Northeasterner and was quite famous in the industry. He was famous for being strict. In the early days when Pei Chi was with him, she was only assigned to serve tea and buy things. She was even asked by Lao Can to buy the t-shirts he used to pick up girls. Pei Chi bought it. She did not humiliate him by buying a small account. Instead, she bought a super large account from Europe and America. Lao Can was not angry, but when he saw Pei Chi the next day, he said meaningfully, "I didn't expect that I still have so much room for appreciation." As he spoke, he rubbed his nose and started working. Pei Chi stood there in a daze. She was still trying to figure out the meaning of the demon's words. At that time, she had been too impulsive and bought a super large size. Would he not even give her a chance to serve tea and buy a t-shirt now? While he was deep in thought, Old Ken shouted in his direction, "Little Pei, what are you waiting for? Get over here." Pei Chi was stunned again, but she quickly came back to her senses and ran over. This time, Lao Can sincerely taught Pei Chi how to be a photographer and also taught her how to deal with celebrities. He was really diligent in teaching her. He was so strict that Pei Chi wanted to cry. Chapter 745. Old Can, on the other hand, did not ask her to do these things anymore. He brought her around the world and even took her out to do some private work. In those private spaces, Old Can was a professional cameraman, and Pei Chi blushed at the thought of helping rich women take photos of their private stash. Old Can turned around. "Why are you blushing? You don't have any of these." Pei Chi glared at him. "I thought you were quite principled." Old Ken had many representative works, such as Animals on the Verge of Extinction, African Refugees, and The Perspective of a Savior. But at this moment, he was taking nude photos of rich women. Old Ken seemed to have noticed the disdain in Pei Chi's eyes. He spat out the cigarette in his mouth and looked at her. "Pei Chi, stop acting like a little saint. What's wrong with me working hard to earn money? Buddha needs incense money. Pei Chi responded with an "oh," and obediently followed his instructions to rearrange a small object that was covering the private parts of the rich woman. It was really shameful. Old Can's movements were very precise. Soon, he finished taking the photo of the rich woman. The rich woman put on a bathrobe and passed the check to Old Kansas. Old Can especially let Pei Chi hold it. How about staying for a drink? The rich woman's voice was soft and seductive. Old Can had already packed up his things. He slung them over his shoulder and coughed lightly. Not today. He paused for a moment. There's a friend here. The rich woman glanced at Pei Chi, smiled meaningfully, and let go of him. Okay. Let's make an appointment next time. Pei Chi immediately followed Old Can out and quickly caught up with his big strides. Master, is this 1 million for the labor fee for taking photos or for your private service? Old Can stopped in his tracks and looked at Pei Chi very seriously. He said very seriously, Little Pei, do you think I'm worth 1 million before I can use that super big account? Pei Chi had been with him for a long time, so she would also say a few dirty words. I think Master's hands are quite nimble. Well, your master, never beat around the bush. Old Can took the check and said, I'll give you 100,000. Pei Chi was stunned. 100,000. So easy. Old Can looked at her dumbfounded face and couldn't help but laugh. He pinched her soft and tender little face. Are you dumbfounded? Crazy with joy? Let's go, Master will treat you to a feast. Master, you really should nourish yourself. Probably because she had been with Grandpa Can for a long time, Pei Chi's mood was very different. It was as if he had landed on the ground, as if he had completely integrated into the city, and as if he had completely integrated into this circle. The wine cup was still warm. Lao Can leaned against the back of the chair and looked at Pei Chi. Xiao Pei, don't look at me as if you're a bad person. I don't like a little girl like you. You're more like my daughter. He gestured a 4, indicating that he was now 40 years old. Pei Chi eagerly poured a glass of wine for him and said obsequiously, Of course I won't, Master. I'm the one who has always harbored wild ambitions toward Master. I won't dare to do it again in the future. You're getting more and more cunning. Old Can glared at her. Who did you learn that from? Pei Chi looked serious and said, Didn't you learn it from Master? Old Can laughed and leaned over to rub her hair. Naughty girl. Soon, he announced in a very cool manner, Girl, you'll be working with me from now on. Whenever you go out of the mountains, just tell me Master's name. You'll definitely make a name for yourself. Master, can you share some of the photography business with me? Pei Chi was very fawning. I need money. Old Can glared at her. Chapter 746. Tangyu sat in the car, separated by the bustling city and the glass. As he watched, his eyes felt a little warm. Those used to be exclusive to him, but now, she was smiling at others and having her hair stroked by another man. Yet, he could not do anything about it at all. With a cigarette between his slender fingers, he took a long drag and leaned his head against the car window, watching quietly. Watching her happy look, watching her smile replace the coldness on her face. Tangyu was happy, but also a little sad. The one who accompanied her out of the shadows wasn't him, but someone else. He knew that photographer very well. He was a big shot in the photography industry, but he was also capricious enough. Everything depended on his mood, and he might not be willing to shoot some celebrities even if they offered him money. Lao Can's reputation wasn't very good, but there was one good thing about him: he had never fooled around with the girls in the same company. Tangyu watched quietly. He was a little hungry, but he had no appetite at all, because he was so angry that his liver was hurting. When Pei Chi and Lao Kan came out of the restaurant, she touched her belly, feeling that today was the most full she had ever eaten. Lao Kan opened the car door slowly and gestured for her to get in. He drove directly to a bank to withdraw the check and gave Pei Chi 100,000 yuan on the spot. Pei Chi deposited the money into her card and looked at Lao Kan with a smile. "Sir, I think you looked the most handsome when you gave me the money just now." Lao Kan still got in the car slowly and turned to look at Pei Chi in the back seat. "Make the photo look better, and business will be better next time." Pei Chi tried hard to agree. Lao Kan thought about it and felt a little worried, so he added a few more words. "Don't give up your dreams for this small amount of money, understand?" Pei Chi glanced at him and felt that it was a little funny that Lao Kan was talking about dreams with her. But she didn't dare to talk back, so she nodded vigorously. "Got it." But Lao Kan wasn't very satisfied with her answer. He frowned. "What do you know, little girl? So many people are lost in the Vanity Fair and can't extricate themselves from it. Just because they have a little fame, they become so arrogant that they don't know who they are anymore." In the end, he accepted all kinds of jobs, even the shady ones, such as helping people take photos or something. "That seems to be what you do." Pei Chi was gradually not afraid of him and talked back. Lao Kan was stunned for a moment and then said coldly, "How can I compare with them? I'm robbing the rich to help the poor." Then he started the car and decided not to talk to his little apprentice anymore. He didn't know that this girl was so cunning before. After a while, a small voice came from behind. "Master, you've even robbed me of my beauty. Believe it or not, I can ask the editor to send you back tomorrow," Lao Kan said fiercely. As he drove, he took a puff of his cigarette. His posture was unparalleled. He was basically a rough man with a very strong character. However, there were many women who liked to joke around. Moreover, it was the rich women who liked it. Pei Chi knew this. As for who Lao Kan slept with, it was up to him. Besides, he didn't charge for sleeping with women. He only charged for taking photos. Pei Chi thought darkly. Maybe sleeping with a woman was accompanied by taking photos. Lao Kan held the cigarette in his mouth and admired his little apprentice's face from the rearview mirror. In fact, he didn't like this girl at the beginning. She was too cold, too indifferent, and she was arrogant. It wasn't until she bought a super size for him that he started to look at her differently. Chapter 747. Old Kan felt that in the field of photography, one had to have character so that the work would have soul. Otherwise, what would be interesting about the work of a dull beauty? After a long time, he was not too disappointed. Sometimes, the little girl could come up with some dirty jokes. Old Kan liked Pei Chi very much and raised her like his own child. He taught her how to get along in this circle and all kinds of things. These changes subverted Pei Chi's previous understanding. But it had to be said that it really brought her into a whole new world. In that world, there was no Tang Yu, her dear brother, or the past and pain. She felt that this world was very novel, but she did not know that her novelty was the deepest pain of Tang Yu. He wanted her to be happy, but he was afraid that she would go out and never come back. Old Kan drove back to the magazine office and threw the bag in his hands to Pei Chi. "Take this and fix the photos taken yesterday. The client wants them tomorrow." As for the photos taken for the rich lady, Pei Chi had to go back and work overtime. She nodded. Old Kan had already gone to the smoking room to vent his craving. Pei Chi took the photos taken yesterday and uploaded them to the computer. She selected them one by one and refined them. Old Kan once said that the most terrible thing about photos was distortion. No matter how good you were at fixing it, it would not be good if it was distorted. In the beginning, because of fixing the photos, Pei Chi was scolded by Old Can many times. Pei Chi selected the photos one by one and sat in front of the computer for a long time without moving. Her colleague next to her slid the computer chair over and coughed softly. Old Can took advantage of working hours to pick up girls again. Pei Chi put her finger on her chin and turned her face sideways with a smile. No, we went out to pick up some fresh air. Well, Old Can's reputation in the company was really bad. Her colleague said mysteriously, a woman came today and waited for Old Can in the chief editor's office for a long time. Old Can should have been arrested by now. Pei Chi's eyes fell on the computer, but she looked up at this time. Is it because of Old Can's romantic debt? Her colleague smiled mysteriously. She's young and beautiful. You'll know soon enough. Pei Chi also smiled. Because of the 100,000 yuan, she was still very loyal and did not sell Lao Can's rich private life. While they were talking, Old Can had already walked over slowly. The colleague quickly slid to the side, pretending to be busy. Lao Can had seen it, but he did not think much of it. He walked to Pei Chi's desk and knocked on it. Come with me to the managing editor's office. Pei Chi nodded, and her colleagues were quite envious. Pei Chi followed Lao Can, the most powerful Lao Can in the entire magazine agency, the Lao Can that even celebrities didn't buy. Moreover, it was said that Old Can had a lot of private work, so following him would be very profitable. However, not many people could endure it, because they were famous for being talkative and hot-tempered, making them difficult to serve. Pei Chi now looked like a standard assistant. She wore a white shirt, a black skirt, and a pair of black-rimmed glasses. She looked like a rookie in the workplace. Following Lao Can into the chief editor's office, Pei Chi stopped in her tracks. She saw Pei Huan. Pei Huan was sitting on the sofa. When she saw Pei Chi, she was obviously stunned for a moment, then smiled. I didn't expect to see you here. The chief editor was very good at asking questions. Miss Pei, do you know our Chi? You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.